Hey everyone, so this is my video about our first essay in 201 Humanities for the Honors College. So here's the assignment. Your job is to essentially kind of continue the conversations that we've had in class if you're online, the conversations we're having in the DQs. And the idea is that we want to know what you think the relationship is between the humanities and the sciences. And it's all about you. One of the things that, if you don't know me as a professor yet, these open-ended questions, I really can't judge your rightness or wrongness. I can only judge how well you support your position. And so that's what we're looking for here is we're looking not necessarily for your correctness, because how would I know whether or not you're right? None of us knows. This is also very personal, a lot of this essays this semester are going to be very personal. And so this is asking you about what connections do you see between the arts and the sciences? What questions do you see in this book between sort of the humanities things that we're discussing in class, online, in the books, and the sciences? This is about the very exploration of our genetic sequencing. And from there you argue. This is a very traditional sort of essay assignment. So as an essay, it has 3 parts, which is very traditional. When you get into more complicated essays, you get more parts. But that's it, is we have these 3 parts. And so we need an introduction, and the goal of that introduction we'll go over here shortly. And then we have a body that argues that our thesis is correct. And then you conclude, and the conclusion is, why does your argument matter? And we'll get to those things here in a minute. I have other videos about how the system works if you want to watch those. I go much more in depth into this, but we're in a higher level class now, so I'm trying to push past those things. But you can definitely check out my YouTube channel for other videos on this idea of what a paper is. We don't want any outside research, but if you have the Norton Critical Edition, which we asked you to buy, there are critical essays in the back that might help you. And so if you're struggling with the first part, which we'll get to, maybe read some of those, especially those ones that really appeal to you. Look at the title and see if the title somehow grabs your attention. And those are just critical essays about the book. For example, a lot of women I know, especially women who are going into science and STEM and nursing, really respond to the treatment of Rosalind very sort of viscerally. And so there are certainly essays in the back of the Norton about Rosalind. And even our DQ this week is about Rosalind. And so we're going to look at the rubric because I will definitely show it to you. But here's the guide. So we start by generating the thesis. We've already prompted you the thesis. What is this relationship between the humanities and the sciences? And if you don't have an answer for that, that's okay. Maybe continue the reading. Look now as you're reading for an answer to that question. And we collect data from the book, which we'll talk about here shortly. And then we actually sit down and write. And the reason we want to collect data from the book outside of that, if you're new to me as a professor, is that a book, especially even though this book is, shortish and it has huge font, a book is still, 100, 200 pages of text. And that's a lot of data to have to sift through. And we're going to see that when you guys do the CLC assignment, that when you have a lot of data to sift through, it's really nice to weed out some data. And so, the reason we want you to collect the data from the book is so that you can actually weed out some of the data. It'll actually make the writing part easier if you're doing this as we go. But here's where we start. What do you want to say? What is this relationship? That's the answer. If you can answer that in one sentence, that's your thesis. If you can't, great, write it out. And that's what I'm saying here. If you don't know how to answer that question, write it out. Work through your thoughts. Oftentimes, at the end of that sort of expression, at the end of all this, you'll get to your thesis eventually if you just write for 10 minutes, whatever your ideas are, until you've run out of ideas. And somewhere in there is a thesis. And this is what we call free writing. It's one of the what we call exigence strategies that we have in writing. But if you can't come up with things, maybe come to office hours and we'll chat. Those are, again, through Discord or through whatever means, since these videos will outlast the pandemic, hopefully. But that's the idea, is you should know going right now into this what you want to say. And if you don't, our goal is to discover what you want to say first. A lot of people will just sort of deal with ambivalence towards their thesis, and it shouldn't be ambivalent. It should be, something you really want to say. And the reason for that is that it drives the writing and it helps you actually write better because you're very clear in your ideas. But once we have that, once we've had this design a thesis, what do you want to say, we can then move on to the data. Why did we decide on the thesis before the data? Well, that was very simple. If I just had you going through this book and pulling out important quotes, you'd have too many quotes. And the whole point of collecting data is to reduce the number of quotes we have. So once you have identified, okay, this is what I want to say about how the humanities and the sciences are really connected, what their relationship is. And it doesn't have to be positive. It doesn't have to be negative. It could be really complicated. But we need some description, and it needs to be clear what you're trying to say. But once you have an idea, go ahead and go back through what you remember about the book and find those quotes that might help you support that position. If you think that something in the critical essays might help you, go read those and pull out quotes from them that might help you. And then we want to put those on a Word document with page numbers because that will actually assist you later. But you want to put that on a Word document because if you can turn this 200-page book into 3 pages of quotes and notes, you don't have to ever pick up the book again unless you really want to read it again. Because all of your notes have been synthesized into this short form that we can use to achieve our goal to write this paper. From there, we start to organize. We, again, cull our data. What quotes actually help support your position? What quotes did you think would, but now that you're looking at them aside from the book, you're not so sure anymore. So again, we start weeding out more and more data so that our data set is manageable. So you want to think about that. And then once you've thought out, like, here's this evidence, you're like, how does this help prove that the relationship is the way that I say it is? That's probably going to be your topic sentence to guide your paragraph. And again, a paragraph is a lower level of abstraction in conveying ideas. If you want to know what that means, we can talk about it. But a paragraph, simply for our purposes, is something that does less analysis than a paper. And so what we want to do is we want to break up however we say the relationship operates between these two entities. We want to break that up into smaller pieces. So you have to decide how to do that. And so, for example, if we're going to get into personal things, we could talk about your relationship with your parents. What is the relationship between you and your parents? Well, again, it's probably the same relationship between the arts and the sciences. And so we want to cull that data down and talk about, okay, well, we want to claim for that. And then once we have a claim, we're like, okay, my relationship with my parents is complicated or is healthy or is whatever you're going to argue there, great. From there, we break it up. How is it complicated? What complicates that relationship? Or how is it positive? Because we said it's positive. Maybe it's non-existent. How do we prove its non-existence? And so from there, we break down our claim into smaller bits, and that's what the paragraph is meant to do, is to prove the smaller bits. And then this is meant to help you outline. I am a big proponent of outlining ideas first, even if it is just on a sheet of paper with four lines, right? Thesis, topic sentence 1, topic sentence 2, topic sentence 3, or whatever. That will help you organize. The other thing that I want you guys to be thinking about, and this is again in other videos on this channel, is that within that organizational system, there has to be some logic. Why is your first paragraph your first paragraph? I'm very fond of saying in classes that the first paragraph is often the first paragraph because that's what we found first. But that's not a really healthy, good way of looking at logic. Because we found it first, it's not really logical. It's random, really. So we want to put our paragraphs into a logical sequence. Please note some things. No list in your thesis. Do not give me a list of 3 things. That's 5-paragraph format. You're 200 level writing in high school or in college now. We need to get rid of that. It needs to be one thing. And again, that's in videos here on this channel, so you can watch those. And so that's where the outline can really help you. But once you have the outline, we know we need the intro, body, conclusion, and we have these 3 parts. We can actually start to draft. And so the idea is, in this next set of slides, to actually show you how I am going to be analyzing your parts. So if we start with the introduction, right? The introduction should provide me with a summary of the Double Helix book, but it should be a summary whose goal is to not just tell me the story, but to tell me the story in relation to what you're arguing the relationship is between the humanities and the sciences. And so if something is not part of that relationship, why are you telling me about it in the summary unless it's important to the book? And so this is where, again, really culling down to be very simple, simplistic. In other words, what we're doing here, if you go back into our other videos, we're defining our topic. Our topic is how this book portrays the relationship. Our scope is the relationship you're hoping to develop. And so we need to move from topic to scope. And we do that by describing the book. We have to define our key terms. You might want to decide to define things like, what do we consider the humanities? What do we consider the sciences? And how are you defining them in this book in particular? Because it may not be very clear. So we define key terms, we define topic, we define scope. We're presenting all of that information. And the key measure here, if I can read your thesis at the end of your first paragraph, and it makes total sense to me without even having to pick up the book to look something up, that's a pretty good thing. That's what we're looking for. And so that's where we get to A. And so I actually pulled the next introduction, the rubric's description of what an introduction for an A paper needs to do. It is a summary of the book that is insightful and comprehensive. Insightful here means that it's actually providing me insight into your thesis. And comprehensive means you're not leaving out big plot points. And that the thesis is exceptional, showing the full alignment with evidence from the text. That means that the thesis is in control of everything you're about to say. And that's important. But that's how we're measuring that. So if you don't get an A here, you likely should be looking at what didn't I achieve in my introduction. For body paragraphs, and this is really the bulk of things that I talk about in videos, it comes back to topic, sentence, evidence, discussion. And so here we have from the rubric, the body of the paper is effective and comprehensive. It uses exceptional textual evidence. There should be evidence for every assertion in your paragraphs. All of those assertions should be aligned with the topic sentence of each paragraph, and all of those should be aligned with the thesis statement. And that's how we test that. But the way you guys might know it, because although a lot of this is very abstract, is your body paragraph should look a lot like DQs. You make a claim. That claim is a smaller version of the relationship you've built in your thesis, and you're showing me that that relationship exists. Great. And then once you prove that relationship exists, you show me how that relationship or that part is part of the larger whole that you're discussing. And all of that, again, there's tons of videos on this YouTube channel that go over many different ways to do this, because there is no one correct way, but there are several incorrect ways. And so just as many ways that you could do it right, there are as many ways that you could do it wrong. And largely what we're looking for here is your control of ideas. Because if you do not control your ideas, you're not communicating them effectively to other people. And so topic sentence, claim that supports thesis, quotes directly from the book cited in APA format, APA 7th, and then the discussion's job is to make this all one argument. So that's what I said earlier. The discussion ties the evidence to our topic sentence. It ties the evidence to any other evidence in that paragraph, and it ties that evidence in that topic sentence to the thesis. And that's where a lot of your work has to come in. And again, there's lots of examples of this in other videos, and you can see how I do that in other videos and other genres of writing. And then the conclusion. So I actually like to teach you guys conclusion by having you do a little thought experiment. So if you just close your eyes for a second and you think of your favorite American romantic comedy movie, and it doesn't even matter what movie it is, it's your favorite romantic comedy movie made in the United States. You close your eyes and you think of it and you ask yourself, how does that movie end? It often ends with a kiss. Why? Because for Americans, that's cathartic, which is interesting because some of the movies, the main characters had been doing more physically intimate things than kissing, but somehow we all recognize that as the sort of happily ever after moment in a romantic comedy movie. And if it doesn't end that way, it may not be a romantic comedy movie. It may be a different genre, or it may be a different country. But there's lots of reasons why it wouldn't end that way. And so what you're feeling there is catharsis. For a paper, for an academic paper, catharsis comes from the idea that your ideas matter. And so here you've been making this larger argument about how within this novel, or within this book, it's not a novel, within this book, there is a relationship between the humanities and between the sciences. Why does it matter? What does that tell us about the bigger relationship between the humanities and the sciences outside of that book? And so this is where we get inductive. We see the bigger picture now. It should be exceptional. It demonstrates a strong personal revelation. That's about you. In my class, I often will try and make these things relevant to you. And here you're trying to make those things relevant, not just to you, but to us as an audience. And so we want to see that in some way, this book has helped you understand that if you are studying the sciences, why the humanities should matter to you. And if you're studying the humanities, why the sciences should matter to you. This is the so what, the why moment, right? If we go back to Simon Sinek, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so this is the why you do it. This is the final closeout elevator pitch to me about your ideas and why they matter. And that's the important part. That's where we gain catharsis. You've already showed me the what and the how. Now we've moved on to the why. And that's academic writing. It's not meant to necessarily, it's actually meant to do the opposite. It's exactly the way Simon Sinek set it up. Because in science, we care much more about the what and the how than the why. We want to know that everything you say is true before we get to why it matters that it's true. So here is the actual rubric, which I promised I would show you. And so you can see that these are the tests, the measures. Anything that I say is built into these, defining these terms. And so how would I know if a summary of the double helix is insightful and comprehensive? Well, number one, you won't miss major plot points. And number two, you'll define everything that I need to know in order to understand your thesis. That's where we get the insightful. How do I know if the body of the paper is effective and comprehensive? We go back to topic, sentence, evidence, discussion. Does it have all those parts? Is it one paper? Again, we want to move away from having a list of 3 in your thesis because that is not comprehensive or effective. It's boring. The conclusion, is it demonstrating a strong personal revelation? Is it exceptional? How are we measuring that? Is it that why moment, that bigger picture moment that we can all hopefully see and understand? So that's what we're looking for in this paper. If you have questions, of course, come to office hours and we'll chat. Otherwise, I hope this was helpful to you guys understanding the point.